Imagine, just for a moment, that it is the absolute sweltering heat of July, and the year is 1700.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Hot, sticky, no air conditioning anywhere.
Exactly. But you are seated at this lavish, incredible dining table in France, and the host serves you a perfectly frozen, towering pyramid of ice
In July.
in July, and it's filled with delicate spring flowers. Oh, and inside that frozen centerpiece, there's a sorbet flavored with the digestive byproduct of a sperm whale.
Which is just, I mean, it's such a staggering image, right?
It really is. And in the 17th century, serving that, it wasn't a dare. It wasn't some weird mistake. It was the absolute, undeniable, ultimate flex of extreme wealth.
Yeah, it completely challenges our modern assumptions. Because, we tend to think that engineering our food to manipulate our bodies or our environments, we think that's a thoroughly contemporary idea.
Right, like we invented it.
Exactly. We look at like molecular gastronomy or these hyper-engineered botanical wellness drinks today, and we think we are at the absolute peak of culinary innovation.
But welcome to this deep dive, because today we are going to completely shatter that assumption for you.
We really are.
We're looking at an incredible, highly detailed manual from the year 1700. It's called La Maison Reglée, which translates to the regulated house.
Written by a widely traveled culinary master named Oettinger.
Yeah, Oettinger. And our mission today is to essentially shortcut your way to understanding how the elite aristocrats of the late 17th century blended art, early empirical science, and frankly, terrifying global trade route.
To turn dining into a pure act of supremacy.
Yes, supremacy is a perfect word for it.
Because Oettinger's text, it isn't just a cookbook. I mean, it's an instruction manual on how to project dominance. When you look at the techniques he outlines, you realize everything we consider a modern luxury actually has this highly engineered, impossibly extravagant equivalent from over 3 centuries ago.
So if we are talking about projecting dominance, let's start with the centerpiece of the aristocratic table. Because to show true power in the 1600s, simply buying expensive things was, well, amateur hour.
Oh, yeah. Anybody with money could just buy a nice plate.
Right. If you really wanted to prove you were untouchable, you commanded the seasons themselves. You forced winter to appear in the middle of summer. So how did Oettinger actually achieve this?
Well, it required this monumental triumph over nature, starting with the physical infrastructure of massive subterranean ice houses that they packed during the winter.
Which is an insane amount of labor on its own.
Exactly. But Oettinger's manual goes far beyond just storing the ice. He gives us the meticulous, step-by-step methods these culinary masters use to create elaborate architectural ice sculptures.
Okay, let's unpack this because the visual he describes is stunning. He talks about using custom-made tin half molds.
Yeah, often shaped like square pyramids or these towering triangles.
And carefully layering seasonal fruits or delicate flowers inside these tin molds. But there's a very specific geometry to it, right?
Oh, absolutely. They had to place the absolute smallest, most delicate items at the very tip of the pyramid and then gradually scale up to the largest pieces at the heavy base.
Which serves a dual purpose, I imagine.
It does. Aesthetically, it draws the eye upward to a delicate point, but structurally, it ensures the heavier fruits don't just crush the fragile petals during the freezing process.
That makes total sense.
And the freezing process itself is where the empirical science of the era really shines. Oettinger instructs the chef to fill that densely packed mold with water, seal it, and then completely bury it in a wooden bucket filled with crushed ice that has been heavily salted.
Wait, I have to pause you there because that sounds completely counterintuitive.
How so?
Well, adding salt to ice lowers its freezing point and forces it to melt faster. I mean, we use salt to melt ice on our driveways in the winter. So how does a melting bucket of ice somehow flash freeze the water inside the sealed tin mold?
That is a brilliant question. And it gets right to the heart of early thermodynamics.
Yeah.
You are entirely correct that the salt forces the ice to melt. But changing a solid into a liquid requires energy. Specifically, it requires heat. Because the salt forces this phase change to happen incredibly rapidly, that melting ice desperately pulls ambient heat from wherever it can.
Oh, I see. And the nearest source of heat is the water inside the tin mold.
Precisely. It creates this aggressive endothermic reaction. The melting salty slush outside the mold sucks the thermal energy right through the highly conductive tin.
Wow.
Yeah, creating a super chilled environment that flash freezes the water inside into a solid block, even in a sweltering summer kitchen. They were manipulating the latent heat of fusion through pure observation.
That is literally 17th century molecular gastronomy in action.
Yeah.
It's like high-end Vegas ice sculptures, but without modern freezers.
Exactly. But once you have successfully manipulated thermodynamics to create this rock-solid block of ice, you are left with a new problem.
It is completely stuck inside a metal tin.
Yep. And if you just try to pry it out, you'll shatter the ice and destroy the expensive fruits inside.
Right, which would be a disaster. So Oettinger details this clever unmolding trick. He tells the chef to take a heavy cloth, submerge it in boiling water, and rapidly rub the outside of the tin mold,
It's so smart. The intense, localized heat transfers just enough to melt the microscopic outer layer of the ice pyramid.
allowing the entire structure to just slip out flawlessly without breaking a single petal.
What's fascinating here is the theatrical presentation for the guests. These towering, perfectly clear pyramids of frozen summer fruits weren't just brought out on a platter.
No, of course not.
Oettinger describes surrounding them with ornate goblets of variously colored iced waters. The dining table literally transformed into a winter wonderland in July.
It was visceral, undeniable proof to your guests that you had the wealth and the staff to bend the laws of nature to your will.
Absolutely. The energy required to do this back then was roughly equivalent to owning a fleet of luxury sports cars today.
But the spectacle wasn't just visual, right?
Mm.
They were actually eating these frozen creations, specifically something Oettinger calls the sorbet de Levant, or sorbet.
Yeah, the sorbet.
And when I read his recipe for the sorbet base, the ratios seemed completely out of balance. He specifies using half a pound of refined sugar for every single pint of water.
That's a lot.
That is an almost sickening level of sweetness.
It sounds excessive to a modern palate, sure.
Ah,
But there is a very specific, highly clinical culinary reason for that intense concentration of sugar.
okay, what is it?
The extreme freezing process actually numbs the human palate. Cold temperatures drastically dull our perception of flavor and sweetness.
Oh, right, like how melted ice cream always tastes way sweeter than frozen ice cream.
Exactly. Oettinger understood empirically that to make a frozen dessert taste like anything at all, you had to aggressively overflavor and oversweeten the liquid base before freezing it.
And he certainly didn't stop at sugar. This is where we get back to that incredible hook from earlier. He perfumed this sorbet with musk and ambergris.
Yes.
Ambergris, for anyone who doesn't know, is a waxy substance produced in the digestive system of sperm whales. It's often found floating in the ocean or washed up on shores.
Which just sounds so unappetizing to us.
Right. Why on earth are they putting whale byproduct in a summer dessert?
Well, it was the ultimate aromatic status symbol. Ambergris and musk were staggeringly expensive. I mean, requiring immense, treacherous global voyages to acquire.
Just to get a scent.
Yeah, they were highly prized for their incredibly complex, earthy, almost animalic scents.
Mm-hmm.
By infusing them into a sorbet, you were telling your guests that you could source the rarest, most difficult to obtain ingredients on the planet.
Just to flavor a dessert that was going to melt into a puddle in 20 minutes.
Exactly, a massive flex.
So if creating ice pyramids was about forcing winter to appear during the summer, we see the exact inverse happening when we look at their preservation techniques.
Which is our next segment, yeah.
Right. We move from mastering temperature to essentially mastering time.
That is a great way to look at it. If ice was about controlling the heat, the art of syrups and compotes was about forcing summer to last through the dead of winter.
It was about capturing the absolute peak of a fruit's ripeness and locking it in a state of suspended animation.
Which brings us to Oettinger's bizarrely specific method for making red currant syrup.
Yes, I was hoping we'd get to this. He instructs the chef to crush the red currants and then leave the raw juice to ferment in a cellar for 3 to 4 days.
But he is incredibly adamant about one rule.
Yeah, the tureen holding the juice must be placed on a suspended wooden plank or an empty barrel.
So that it does not touch the cellar floor under any circumstances.
Wait, I mean, letting crushed fruit juice sit and ferment in a dark cellar on a suspended plank? Isn't that walking a terrifyingly fine line between making a sweet syrup and accidentally serving your guests vinegar or wine?
It sounds almost like a culinary superstition, doesn't it? A sort of kitchen folklore.
It really does. How do they not poison their aristocratic guests?
Well, it is a razor-thin line, but they were walking it with incredible precision. This is actually a masterclass in early practical microbiology.
Really, just from moving it off the floor?
Yeah. Oettinger didn't know the word microbes, obviously, but his strict rule about the tureen not touching the floor is rooted in a brilliant understanding of temperature regulation.
Okay, how so?
In a 17th century cellar, the stone or dirt floor acts as a massive thermal sink. Its temperature fluctuates wildly depending on groundwater levels, the surrounding soil, and cold drafts sweeping across the ground.
So if you put the bowl directly on the dirt, the temperature of the juice is going to wildly swing up and down.
Exactly, which would lead to unpredictable, chaotic bacterial growth, meaning spoiled juice or vinegar.
Wow.
But by elevating the tureen and suspending it on a wooden plank, the wood acts as an insulator. The tureen is now surrounded by the ambient air of the cellar, which is significantly more temperature stable.
That is fascinating. So the stable air temperature guarantees a slow, highly controlled fermentation.
Yes. And that controlled fermentation allows the natural yeasts on the fruit to go to work. They specifically break down the pectins in the red currants.
Pectins being the biological glue, right?
Exactly. Pectins are the complex biological glue that holds plant cell walls together and makes fruit juice cloudy and thick. By letting the yeast gently break down that biological glue, the juice clarifies perfectly on its own.
Without crossing the line into turning alcoholic.
Right. The empirical observation required to figure that out is just astounding.
And then once that juice is perfectly clarified, Oettinger boils it with sugar until it hits what he calls the caramel stage.
Which is an incredibly high concentrated heat.
Yeah, it completely sterilizes the liquid and essentially suspends it in time for winter consumption.
And that intense level of mechanical and chemical precision extends to how they prepped the fruits themselves. The method he outlines for green apricots is a perfect example.
Well, I love this detail. To make a compote out of green apricots, you obviously have to remove that fuzzy exterior.
Right.
Oettinger's method is to put the raw apricots in a linen napkin with a handful of coarse salt and a generous splash of vinegar.
Just right in the napkin. Right in the napkin. Then, 2 kitchen staff take the opposite ends of the napkin and vigorously rub them back and forth, tossing the apricots inside to strip the fuzz away before boiling them.
It is brilliant chemistry and physics working in tandem.
Because of the salt.
Yeah, the coarse salt acts as a mechanical abrasive. It essentially functions as a culinary sandpaper to scrub the skin.
But the vinegar is the secret weapon, isn't it?
It is. The vinegar provides acetic acid. That acid chemically weakens the delicate organic bonds that hold the fuzz to the skin of the apricot.
That is so clever.
So with a few vigorous rubs in that acidic, abrasive environment, you emerge with perfectly smooth, pristine green apricots ready for the boiling pot.
Without ever having to take a knife to them and risk bruising the flesh.
Exactly.
It is so incredibly hands-on, yet so chemically precise. But, as impressive as mastering local seasons and manipulating local fruits was, it feels like that was just the baseline for these aristocrats.
Oh, definitely. That was just the warm-up. Right. If local mastery was about tricking time, global mastery was about shrinking the map.
Yes.
How did someone like Oettinger even get his hands on the ingredients for the next section of his manual?
Well, this is where the manual shifts from local supremacy to projecting absolute global dominance. We are entering the era of the global apothecary.
The dawn of tea, chocolate, and coffee appearing on the European table.
And Oettinger does not hold back on his own hype here.
Not at all. He boasts extensively about his travels to Spain, Holland, Germany, and Italy. And he makes this very bold claim that he, along with a man he simply calls Moore, were among the very first 3 people to introduce these exotic drinks to the French court.
Now, while the historical accuracy of him being the absolute first is, well, it's debatable.
Sure.
But his brag highlights just how novel, exclusive, and mysterious these beverages were. They were not viewed as casual morning pick-me-ups.
No, they were categorized as high-tech, highly potent medical elixirs.
Let's look at how he describes tea.
Okay. He notes it is sourced all the way from the Kingdom of Siam, which is modern-day Thailand.
Right.
The preparation he outlines is simple enough, just pouring boiling water over a pinch of leaves.
Yeah.
But the perceived medical benefits are bizarrely clinical.
They really are.
He claims tea lowers the brain fumes, or fumée du cerveau, purifies the blood, and violently wakes the spirits. I have to ask, what on earth are brain fumes?
Okay, so the concept of brain fumes is tied directly to the ancient medical theory of humors, which actually still heavily influenced 17th century thought.
Okay.
The idea was that the digestion of heavy, rich meats and rich wines created physical vapors in the stomach, and they believed these vapors would rise up and literally cloud the mind, causing lethargy and confusion.
So they thought they literally had smoke in their heads from digesting a heavy meal.
Essentially, yes. And because tea is incredibly astringent, meaning it causes bodily tissues to contract and it contains caffeine, it provided a physiological shock.
A jolt to the system.
Yes. It constricted blood vessels and provided a sharp stimulant effect. To a 17th century aristocrat bogged down by a heavy meal, that sudden jolt felt like a magical medical clearing of the physical fog in their brain.
And when you look at his description of coffee, the utility is remarkably similar.
It is.
He identifies coffee as a grain from Persia and the Levant. Its primary medical use, according to Oettinger, was to refresh the blood, magically dissipate the fumes of wine, and specifically to prevent sleep for people who had a staggering amount of business to attend to.
It is fascinating how human nature just remains constant.
Total.
They were using coffee as a high-powered hangover cure to dissipate the fumes of wine, and as a productivity tool to force themselves to keep working.
So what does this all mean? They were treating coffee exactly the way a modern executive treats a double espresso or a chemical energy drink to power through a boardroom meeting.
Yep.
Meanwhile, tea was essentially their version of a 17th century botanical wellness detox to purify their blood.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, consuming these drinks wasn't just about taste. It was about ingesting the power of global trade.
Right, because the logistics of acquiring these drinks completely dwarf a trip to a modern coffee shop.
Completely. And if we want to talk about staggering logistics, nothing compares to how Oettinger handled chocolate.
Oh man, his recipe for chocolate isn't some sweet little candy bar. It is an intensely complex paste.
It really is.
He lists the ingredients: Spanish cacao, vanilla, cloves, cinnamon, mace, and refined sugar. When you actually stop and think about the multi-ocean trade routes required to assemble that one list of ingredients, I mean, it's almost unthinkable.
It is a map of global conquest distilled into a single pot. Think about it. To make that one beverage in Paris in the year 1700, you were relying on vanilla sourced from Mexico,
Wow.
cloves from the islands of Indonesia, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, and cacao harvested in the Americas.
It's insane.
You're talking about fleets of wooden sailing ships navigating pirate-infested waters, surviving scurvy, and enduring months-long deadly voyages just so a French lord could have a warm cup of spiced cacao.
The human cost and the financial capital required to put that drink on the table is staggering.
Yeah.
And the preparation itself was incredibly labor-intensive.
Right.
Oettinger details chopping the hard paste incredibly fine, boiling it, and then vigorously frothing it with a specialized wooden tool he calls a ballon. Why was the frothing so critical?
Well, because cacao paste is naturally incredibly rich in cocoa butter, which is a heavy fat. If you just boil it in water, the fat separates and floats to the top in this unappetizing oil slick.
Gross.
Exactly. But by vigorously beating the hot liquid with the wooden ballon, the chef was forcing an emulsification.
Like breaking it down.
Yes, they were mechanically breaking the fat down into microscopic droplets and suspending them within the water. It creates a thick, luxurious, velvety texture that wouldn't separate.
It is the exact same chemical principle we use to make a stable mayonnaise or a great vinaigrette, but they were applying it to a boiling hot beverage.
And the medical claims Oettinger attaches to this chocolate emulsification were incredibly robust.
Yeah, he states it warmed the stomach, restored natural heat, cleared the bodily humors, and maintained the voice. It was treated as an absolute superfood.
And physiologically, it makes sense why they felt that way. You have an incredibly high fat and caloric density from the cocoa butter and sugar.
Right. Tons of energy.
But cacao also contains a compound called theobromine. Theobromine is a mild stimulant closely related to caffeine, but instead of primarily stimulating the central nervous system, it acts more as a vasodilator.
Meaning it widens blood vessels.
Exactly. It widens blood vessels and acts on the heart.
So it literally increases blood flow and physical warmth.
Yes. To a 17th century body, that sudden massive influx of rich calories combined with the heart-stimulating effects of theobromine, it felt profoundly medicinal.
It didn't just taste good. It physically felt like you were drinking liquid life force.
Absolutely. When a lord offered you this drink, they weren't just offering hospitality. They were proving that their supply chains spanned the known world and that they had access to the absolute cutting edge of global botanical science.
It is just incredible to step back and look at the sheer engineering, the microbiological science, and the deadly global logistics that went into a single meal at an aristocratic table.
It's mind-blowing.
Which brings us right back to you, our listener. The next time you grab a quick coffee on your way to work, or snap off a piece of dark chocolate, or, treat yourself to a scoop of sorbet on a hot July day, take a moment to remember what you're actually doing.
Yeah, you are casually consuming what used to be the absolute pinnacle of human luxury.
Exactly. You're eating something that once required custom tin molds buried in salted ice, multi-ocean trade routes, and sheer culinary genius to produce.
It certainly puts our modern convenience into perspective, because to the elites of 1700 using massive amounts of refined sugar, out-of-season ice, and imported spices, that was the ultimate undeniable proof of their supremacy.
It was the peak of human achievement at the dining table,
It really was.
which leaves us with a thought for you to mull over today. What entirely invisible everyday conveniences do we casually consume right now, things we don't even think twice about, that historians 300 years from now will look back on as unimaginably extravagant luxuries?
It definitely changes how you look at your own kitchen pantry.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will see you next time.